Yeah? Do you need, okay. Great, welcome folks, San Jose Jazz Break Room. This is our concluding component of San Jose Jazz Winterfest Counterpoint with Ukraine. Excited for this conversation today featuring a visual artist that has been part of the festival for us. Just in case folks need restrooms, straight back, pass through the doorway and turn down the hallway, and there's a code for the bathrooms on the wall if need that. And thank you for joining us. Hopefully you had a chance to check out some of the Winterfest program the past couple of weeks. It's been a really fun and interesting and meaningful project for San Jose Jazz to get to work on. So I'm going to introduce a couple of our folks. First of all, Barbara Goldstein, founder of Art Builds Community, and a key part of making this whole visual component for the festival happen. So thank you, Barbara, for making it all work. And also Olga Bekenstein, the co-founder and of AMI Jazz Festival, who's been our partner and co-curator on the festival programming. And so I'll let the two of them come on up.
So I'm very happy to be able to...
How do you want to do mics for them?
Khomenko, who is our visual artist, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. And, thank you. I'll tell you a little bit about Lesia. Lesia is a painter and a multimedia artist. She's been working on work that is related to the war since 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. She is a co-founder of an artist collective in Kyiv. She teaches media arts at the university and has shown her work throughout Europe and now the United States. In fact, she's got a show that's opening in New York on the 15th of March, and she will be rolling up these paintings to take along with her. Some of them will be in the show at the Friedman Gallery, which is in the Bowery, 2 doors down from the new museum. So I was very honored to have the opportunity to work on this project with San Jose Jazz. And I'm not responsible for bringing Lesia here. Olga is. And so I'm going to start by talking about Counterpoint with Ukraine and how it came about. And what I want to ask Olga is really, when you put this together, and you had, I know that you met Brendan in Bulgaria at a conference, and that this idea came about because you curate jazz in Ukraine. But I would like you to talk a little bit about what your thought was when you started putting this show together, what it was that you wanted to say about contemporary Ukrainian music and art, and how you selected the musicians and artists that you brought here. And I know you also brought dance and film. So what was your thinking?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We didn't met in Bulgaria because I wasn't there, but at that event was project that I curated for my festival before, that I commissioned for my festival before. And through that project, Brendan found a festival and offered this incredible collaboration that I am super happy about and grateful. When I was thinking about the project, I wanted to do multidisciplinary project. I didn't want to showcase only music, and especially only jazz music, because it would not show Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian culture, because it is not. But I wanted to make collaboration in which artists would improvise, will tell their original stories, and through the program to show what are we fighting for, to talk not as much about the war in particular, but about our intimate stories, about our private life, about our ancient culture and mythology and all of that, and I wanted to include Lesia work as, and I know that for Lesia it means different, and she will talk about it. But for me, these figures was as a protectors who shows what are we protecting and what are we fighting for. So.
Thank you. So one of the things that was so interesting to me about the festival was that it was multidisciplinary, and that music is something that's very abstract. Yeah. And while we can see the fact that musicians in Ukraine, jazz musicians, are developing their own strategies and styles of music, when we hear the music and we hear them playing with American musicians, we don't necessarily make a connection specifically about Ukrainian culture, because music is very universal, right? When we see the films and we see Lesia's paintings, we are confronted more with the pain and the struggles that people are going through, right?
Yeah, and I hope with beauty and with love as well.
Yeah.
And this also was one of the part, because when you see and hear in the movie some of folk music, Ukrainian folk music, then you can recognize some of those melodies during during concerts. And it just would be easier for you to identify what is Ukrainian, what is not, or something like that.
And I mean, I think that Americans are so incredibly ignorant about other people's cultures, unfortunately, that most people, when they think about Ukrainian culture, they think primarily about folk culture. They're not necessarily aware of all the contemporary culture and what people are doing now.
Yeah, but I think that it's when we want to talk about some unique culture, we will always think about those unique parts, and unique is always will be something folkloristic or something like deeply rooted in the culture, and because contemporary stories, they are based on lots of experiences, on lots of international experiences, of learning and listening lots of other languages, music, reading stories. So they are more universal in general, I think, not only for Ukraine, but for any kind of culture. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
No, that's good. So, Lesia, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you were doing before 2014 and how it evolved after that?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Very nice to have you tonight. Thank you for coming. And I'm briefly maybe introduce myself. I'm Kyiv-based artist. I'm 42, so I was like 41 years based in Kyiv, of course, traveling a lot. But I'm very deeply rooted in Ukrainian situation because it's very potential. It's very connected to your previous discussion about the representation of Ukraine globally, because it has very strong presence of artists, musicians, writers, but very weak situation with institutional landscape in different levels. So mission of my generation since 2005 was to create context around our practices. So I have basically two biographies in one. I'm an artist, painter, and I'm also creating different communities and different initiatives. I was curating, I was directing art educational program. I did a lot of things which create a context for ourselves and like landscape, as I thought. And we always question ourselves as a community. What is necessary to be done right now? Like maybe 18 years ago, it was necessary to just claim that we exist, that there are another form of art could exist. We were fighting with our traditional education, which is very post-Soviet. And in my personal practice, I was always questioning how I could be critical in painting, and I found the way that I would deconstruct figuration as well as mythologization of Soviet past. It is, as I understand now, it was a lot of fakes, but in different mediums that we know recently. Like we have now cyber war with cyber fakes, but if we will look at the Soviet painting, it's full of fakes that were based on censorship. And I was thinking about fragility of the visual language and how we could trust the visual language. And when war started in 2014, it was a completely different situation for Ukrainians because it was very local and we were not like trusted outside with our experience, with our truth. So I was thinking about the fragility of our experience, and that artists could be just witness and not those who produce the knowledge. I was working a lot with a question in what the role of artists in a global politic and in a war issue, because war is a more difficult task for culture, because culture not needed when war started. It's like, I am not agree with this, but it's one of the effects. So I was working with my own footage, one of my projects about the war. My studio in Kiev, in the very center of the city, was facing, windows were facing to the army unit, and I was spying on soldiers from the position of under the roof, like from the snipers' perspective. So I was wondering if I could compare the artistic view with the optic of the shooter, and what's the common point. And I believed that I could deconstruct the nature of the war through this comparing. And I took a photo, zoom those photos of soldiers. Of course, the photos were very noisy, and I made it noisy images, noisy figures. Also, I was also working with a period of 1950s, it's post-Second World War paintings, and it was very realistic paintings, battle paintings about war that explained to white audience what war was about. And of course, it was total Soviet propaganda generated by Stalin's policy. And I was pretend that I don't understand the narration and don't understand figuration, and through this I was deconstructing this narration. And when full-scale invasion started, I was preparing at the time the big show in National Ukrainian Museum, and even prepared the series of work at the time. And then I escaped Kiev next day after the full scale, and just realized that first I should continue my practice despite my stress and everything, but also I should rethink everything because this new experience, it's uncomparable with everything I knew before. It's physical experience, and it's experience, let's say, I'm sorry for this brutality, but it's like war pornography, and it's go much forward and beyond just image. In that way we know it. Then I also have personal stories that my husband, my partner, also new media artist and musician, he's got to territory defense. It's a volunteering army. Like first days of the war, we just escaped together, but then I was staying in Ivano-Frankivsk, and he went to another city to register himself. And then we just have a telephone conversation, and it was not allowed to make video call because of security reasons. And then I started to research this aspect, because before I was using my own photo footage, and since full scale, it became to be forbidden to take any photo of soldiers, of locations. And I realized that photography immediately turned to weapon in the same way, like, I don't know, javelins and HIMARS and so on. And it's proved for many facts that like after posted by someone some selfie online in social media. Next day it could be targeted by opposite side. And it's from both sides. Russian journalists did a lot of mistakes, and the next day it was shelling. So, and I was wondering before full-scale invasion, that war, is it possible that for agents who are involved to war, like soldiers, is it possible to them to represent themselves by themselves? Because there is a theory that over the past after beginning of the internet, of course, and television, the artists not need anymore, and that a war could represent itself through this, like forces could represent themselves through media. And then I understood that something has changed over 20 years. Of course, with this cyber war, with a huge data of controversial facts, on controversial information, and it's very global phenomena. It's not only in our local territory. Of course, Russia is one of the strongest producers of fakes and of this cyber war. But I know that it's affect everyone and everywhere. And so I mixed up two things. Like, I'm taking photo of soldiers who just make photo of themselves and blurring backgrounds, obscuring their faces by themselves with different digital tools like pixelization, blurring, strokes, some overdrawing. And through this, they, for me, became like post-human agents. And I start to layer in a lot of sense in this work. First intention was to compare this tradition of painting with the representation of the war in a classical meaning through the centuries, because it's like large-scale painting, it's always self-irony in my case. Another point it was to reproduce experience of me being outside of Ukraine, because I left Ukraine in March, and since there I haven't been there almost all the time, and I'm on the same position as you. I'm looking in the internet, but I maybe know a little bit more life hacks, where to get more sharp information on full information through some social medias. So I was thinking that this digital experience of the war, especially after pandemic, that we have digital experience of everything, is putting the footage of the war, the news about the war, on the same level with, I don't know, advertisement of computer games or of blockbuster movies. So for me, those figures, with overlaying of some digital information, became similar to like computer avatars, when they like layer in different skills with different superpower. So that's why I wanted to make this work more universal, and to put this, like, not on, now it's not only local conflict, but when I started it was like end of the May, it was a different situation with even support of Ukraine in the war. So it was the idea that I need to speak on very universal language and tag different problems beyond only what happened on our land. And now recently I'm going more abstract. Actually, I was doing this before full scale, but then when the war started, I turned a little bit back and make more realistic works. And then now I'm in very good circumstances on art residency in Miami, so I can really work hardly to make this gesture toward abstract. And also for me, it's very important this context of the USA history. I was always referencing to it in Ukraine, that there is two different tradition in the Soviet time and Western tradition. And I can't just jump to abstraction from Ukraine. And here I'm trying step by step, making my method very transparent, to get this idea of abstraction through the construction narratives, through the construction of figuration, and so on.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you talk about Soviet art, and this was true you see this also in China, where the art schools, they teach anatomy, they teach realistic art, they teach things that are ultimately meant to be propaganda, and they portray things as very black and white and very heroic, and they only portray one point of view. And the work that you're doing, as we were talking about the other night, it introduces a lot of critical thinking into our perception of war and our perception of the relationships between countries, because there are a lot of different ways of interpreting the work. And so you see the work as portraying people, as that the introduction of blurred photography and cyber images make the soldiers into heroic figures and make them invulnerable because you don't know who they are or where they are. And at the same time, when we look at the pieces, and I've been listening to people talking about the pieces, you know, that they see the figures being broken up, or they see the faces being obscured, or like this one here with the face covered, people think of them in a very different way. They think about them as being about a civilization that's breaking up, or they think about the idea that we don't see who the actual people are. We don't see the people. We don't see we don't see the country that is being destroyed. We see it as a blur, and that's like the other side of the coin, is that there are these two sides. One side is they're blurred, and that is their shield. And the other side is, from here, we are not, we don't see the pain. We don't see the suffering. We don't see the destruction that is caused by that. So, and I think ultimately that's what art's supposed to do. Art's supposed to make you question. So, in a way, that, you know, the heroic portrayals in social realism don't provide you that critical thinking. They just say, this is the way it is. We're the heroes, and this is the only side of the story. You're introducing ambiguity, which is something that makes people. It makes them want to linger with the work and really look at it. So one thing I wanted to ask you about was that, I mean, it's unfortunate that we're not able to see the work in the pavilion right now, not because it looked great, which it does, but because you put it in a certain sequence. You arrange the work in a certain sequence. And to me, when I look at that sequence, it seems like the work goes from being more realistic towards more abstract and broken down. Was that your intention?
Yes. First of all, I'm very happy of this kind of perception because it's very sensitive and it's true. I wanted to make figures unrecognizable, not only because of the reference into the idea of glorification, of heroization, which I, of course, very ironic about, but also because it's unclear identity of Ukrainians. And I was working with this for many years. For example, like about 10 years ago, I did a small series of work, quite realistic, figurative, single portraits, but I was building these figures out of different images. So through Photoshop, I create like head from one person, this body, chest from another, and legs from third. And it could be different gender and different age. And they were very weird, not caricature at all. They were just weird. And it was very about that it's unclear Ukrainians. We don't know about them. Maybe we have some stereotypes, but who they are, we don't know. And I was a little bit playing with this. And here I also, of course, when you're working with something like many years ago, you sometimes continue in next projects these intentions, but not like obvious, but it's always follow you in the following works. And also I wanted to make figures scary. Like I imagine after winning of Ukraine, this big show will go to Moscow, for example, and the Russian public will think, "Oh, we knew that Ukrainians are like this. We knew, we saw them on our TV that they were like headless." Because it's scary, you know. I read a lot of facts of witnesses of the war that Ukrainian soldiers, thanks to international support, especially America, USA, they were well equipped, especially after several months. And I read a lot of reports of Russian soldiers that when they just saw Ukrainian soldiers jump out of the tree, they thought they were like aliens, you know. They didn't see anything like this before. It was like, you know, this a lot of optic on the head. It's really very different because the war at the beginning had a lot of references to the World War II because it's huge, it has old tanks, but at the same time it has a cyber component and it has new kind of weapons and it's very different. So this kind of fear which come up out of this recent situation, I also wanted a little bit to fix. So I think it's very sensitive and very punctual perception.
Yeah, so the Ukrainians are fighting with 21st century tools, whereas the Russians are still in the 20th century. And that's your strength.
Yeah, but also I have a lot of jokes from soldiers that they are joking that they are combining very old gun from Soviet, because Ukraine is, you know, we didn't have anything almost at the beginning of the war. So they, for example, a lot of IT engineers are in the army now. So they use drones. They use very progressive soft and very progressive way of coordination with very old metal tubes that they are not working sometimes and so on. So it's really surrealistic. When you go deeper, you just can't believe your eyes because it's very surrealistic. It has a lot of different controversial things in one.
One of the things that I find so interesting and interesting and exciting in a way about what we're seeing is the fact that your generation of Ukrainian artists are just going, you know, like getting out there and doing your work and pushing it out without any fear. So that, can you talk a little bit about how the exhibit that you were part of during the Venice Biennale last year came together? Because the Venice Biennale is in May, and you were invaded at the end of February. So how did that come about? And tell us a little bit about the artists that were involved and the kind of work that you were sharing with people.
Oh, it's very interesting. So it's two questions in one. About not having a fear, I think it's very symptomatic of my generation because I'm a teaching, and this younger generation, they are completely different. Maybe they're shy in front of us, but they're very accurate and doubt a lot. And we were really like a hurricane. We just did a lot of things, had a lot of energy, didn't fear because we had nothing to lose. We were like in the desert, in the middle of 2000. So this intention, of course, is keeping. And this, I find myself like maniac. I really love art, and I really believe in art. And I maniac in good way, of course. And it's one point. And with this Venice Biennale, it's a very particular story. It's not main presentation of the state. It's not an official pavilion. It's a collateral show. It's supposed to be a private show of. We have one oligarchic art institution. Now it's like it's very strong one. It has changed through decades very much. Now it's very, very oriented on local scene. Has a very great research department. They do a lot of important things. But we have a big open question with oligarchy now. So it's like paradox. And they have artistic director, originally Belgium curator, Bernd Helhoff. And he's, in good sense, also maniac. And he is very true Ukrainian, became true Ukrainian because he also doesn't afraid of anything. And when full-scale invasion started, they should exhibit in Venice as usually as a shortlisted international art prize. It's very high-level selection of 20 artists, shortlisted artists, because always part of them are present in main project. So it's a really international, expensive.
Right. So that's the official pavilion.
Not official. It's private event alongside with official presentation. But when war started, they realized that they just can't do this competition show, and they had at least 1 month to rethink. And this Bern curator just saw my first work after beginning of the full-scale invasion. I depicted my husband Max, who was in the beginning of the march in a regular outfit like jeans and something like jacket, but he received already gun because he got to army. Because this equipment appeared like in 1 or 2 months. They just received gun. And he was in double identity at the time. He was, by fact, he was a soldier, but by his image, he was like musician. He had black long hair at that time. And he sent me his selfie. I was asking him, are you saluting there? How army looks like? And he, please send me some photos. I need to see it. And he was saluting on a photo with this gun. Gun maybe was a little bit like on the back. And I immediately realized that it's an ideal representation of what we are as a society. It's a merger of the civil society and army, and it could be clear for people outside because everyone could project the situation on themselves, that it's our regular people. And I posted it in Instagram, and Björn Helhoff just saw it, and as he later told me that he was really disappointed what to do with this show. It's 3 weeks, it's nothing. And from this image, he started to build the exhibition. For me, it's a huge honor, because he said that it's not just reaction, it's like reflection, it's a statement. And he commissioned me because in Venice it was huge space with I don't know, very high ceiling. He commissioned me a serial out of these works, but large scale. So it was the scale. It was like we decided to make it as an installation, and I had like about 3 weeks. I moved from Ukraine to Warsaw on art residency, organized studio, and did like 24 hours. It's 4 meters. It's like 10 feet.
Yeah, but it was about 12 feet. The
12 feet.
figures were about 12 feet
12
high.
feet. I was painting on the floor, and at that time, Bucha happened. So I was on a huge adrenaline, and I was like, I thought I need to do it because it's my mission. Everyone is working now very hardly. I also have to work. And it because Björn has really huge experience. He was as a theater director in Belgium before he became curator. He has a very strong feeling of the space, as you do, because I'm so happy with this installation. So it's always like collaborations with curators. So it was very clear in Venice, but in Ukraine it was amount of critic because those figures I depicted him, Max again, and his friends. IT engineer, chemist, and lawyer. All of them were dressed very regularly, but had guns or walkie-talkie. It was very mixed up, and everyone was saluting. And it was a community, and it was like gang and so on. But it was very realistic and very, very huge figures. Was very well worked with the space, but at that point I realized that such size, the reference very much to Soviet monumental painting, and this is too much propaganda, because you're right that I'm trying to criticize idea of propaganda and deconstruct it, but not follow. And in Ukraine, it was a discussion, because they always have scandals about Venice, always. It was a discussion that is too much Soviet, and we are fighting with Soviet past. So they, and by I was happy that it was discussion around the paintings. And I was like, wow, in 21st century there is a scandals about paintings, and I was so happy about it. And then I decided to go back to this almost human size. I find it's more scary. So it depends how it's set in the space. But for me, it's important that people could project themselves on this because it's huge. They are more like murals outside. It's another kind of perception.
Yeah, those paintings in Venice were larger than life, and they were in a larger than life environment. So when looking at the photographs of them, it's really shocking in a way to see people in street clothes, their regular clothes with the weapons or things that are military, and they're larger than you, and you're looking at them, and it's sort of mysterious and also a little bit scary. Then with these paintings, they're just a little bit larger than you are, and you're right up against them, and you cannot avoid really thinking about what's in front of you and putting your own interpretation on them. And I look at that work, and I think about, there was a book that came out about 10 years ago that was called The Judgment of Paris, and it was about the transition of painting in France from hyper-realistic depictions of war and horses and people to the Impressionist painters, and how shocked people were to actually have to look at something that was not realistic. And when you start to look at something that's not realistic, you have to put your own thoughts into how to complete the idea, right? If it's really realistic, you can only read it one way. But if it's not, and it's open-ended, you have to actually think about what you're looking at, right?
Yeah, but very fun fact about perception in Ukraine, for example, because I've got only drops of in Facebook, in our popular social media, and Facebook is very diverse with different comments, a lot of scandals and something like this. Once, I guess this Pinchuk Art Center, they posted one of those images already obscured. And my father sent me this post because it was 150 comments below, very critical one. Any like affirmation. It was mostly traditional artists, Ukrainian. I even don't know them. And they were critic was like, oh, she depicts soldiers in brutal way. She don't respect them. Look at these shoes. It's not normal shoes. They are not poor, and so on. It was I can do like this and so on and so on. But when soldiers occasionally see my works, they really appreciate it and really like. Because I'm on Instagram, for example, I start to follow soldiers who are posting photos with this obscuration. And in Instagram, they always, who is following me? Let's check. Especially because they're soldiers, they don't trust to anyone. As I check my page, see the paintings, and I see, like 10 likes already. So they really react immediately on this because they recognize this language, even it's painted brutally. I know they personally maybe prefer more realistic because they tattoo, they this military art, what they call art. It's digital, hyper-realistic images. Based also on a little bit on fantasy, a little bit on military aesthetic, a little bit on manga or comics aesthetic, but at least they really understand what it's about. And I never got any, because as they were direct people, if they don't like, they could clarify me and what are you doing. So it's, for me, it means a lot. That it's a language which is translatable through different communities and through different experiences. Because I think that here in the Western world, it's much easier because public is so sensitive, so well educated. This museums program everywhere. They provide this school excursions and so on. I believe in it.
Yeah.
And I met different people over 6 months here, and it's a brilliant feedbacks, always very deep, and I really admire.
Yeah. So do you relate jazz and the abstraction in jazz to the abstraction in paintings?
Let's talk about I would
throw that at you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in general think, and it might sound kind of weird, but that abstract is more concrete because it speaks directly with, I don't know, like something that you can put in words, something that you can put in some like very defined way, and we can put anything, like all our experiences are so broad, and I mean, like even one experience can be described in so many ways, and words for every person mean different, even the same words, but something abstract can feel the same, right? I don't know, but in these terms, yeah, and any kind of music that has some abstraction and something without words, actually. So any kind of instrumental music, electronic music, acoustic music, whatever. Yeah, has this same as art. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think about how a lot of times when you're listening to a composition in jazz, it starts out with a very clear melody and tune. And then as people start improvising, it breaks up, and you're listening and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, they just wove a different song into that. Or there's a different, what is that and what does it mean? It's kind of like what you're doing with your paintings, that you sort of start with something and then there's this other layer that goes on it. And it forces you to actually, with jazz, it forces you to listen and try to figure out how a musician is taking a specific thought and strand of ideas and then weaving new things into it. And I see the same thing in your paintings. And so I can see kind of relationship between the two. So is this why you picked Lesia? Tell me why you picked her for this particular show.
I've been following artwork, different artists, of course, during the last year. And I would say that there are two artists who, for me, spoke is the most, I don't know how to say it, like abstract, but in the same time that I could relate to work, that I could feel, and it would be Lesia's work and Alevtina Kahidze. And yeah, because of that, and we were thinking about both of them, but we decided, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're very happy that you brought her here.
Yeah.
So does anybody in the audience have something that they would like to ask? Don't all speak at once.
I could add a few points.
Yeah,
if,
please do.
First, you asked, and I didn't answer about this difference between more realistic works and abstract. And I think it's like a representation of my last year. So I was really worked so intensively like never, because I was teaching a lot over last 6 years, and here I really focusing only on the practice mostly. And yes, I'm developing very fast, and here it's like earlier work. This one is from August.
This one.
Yeah, this was like shield face, and this is like more recent, and like over a few months, I really jump, and I'm questioning myself if in New York, I will even go more abstract. And actually, as a trick is, I'm sometimes using not only photo footage but also video footage, because as an artist, very based on this classical school. I mean anatomic school. It's not social realistic, but it's anatomic realism, I would say. It's my colleague invent very good definition. So it's very difficult to forget it. It's impossible. Over 15 years I was training myself in a young age. So I always need methods, points that should, make a balance to jump out. And I always make this method very transparent, or visible for our audience through what I am going beyond figuration. And this I'm using video footage, for example, because in video footage they also obscuring faces, but video footage more about real battles, because this gesture, for example, it's a report for volunteers. It's very typical. It's a report for volunteers. They received some equipment, some drones. They always make a group photo or single photo with these packages and say thank you. And this is, I guess, was capturing of Russian soldiers in that moment of capturing. It was very unclear video piece, few seconds, and I was like, shot by shot, I was searching it, and I realized that it helps me to see the figures in more blurring and deconstructing. And also I see a lot of this javelin in action when they affect tanks, for example. For example, they obscuring faces and part of the landscape with the same, and they so mixed up and blending into the landscape. And for me, so I'm looking at the same as everyone, but I'm looking as an artist. I'm very visually. And then I interpret how it could be recognized or what the statement could be out of it. So there is a really, and when Barbara proposed to send 6 works, I was in my studio looking at this and thought, okay, if 6, so it should be like story. And Barbara felt it very strongly and proposed, because first venue was a little bit different. It was more square or circle, and this venue, it's art piece itself, genial art piece, but it also makes this corridor, and it makes our installation time-based as music, time-based.
Yeah.
Because this abstraction through jazz, it's very time-based. You can't, listen 5 seconds ago. You will just follow in the time lapse. And here you have this passage through figures, and it's very, even not music, but like cinematographic effect. And I think also it's off top a little bit, but after our experience of pandemic, this body experience, being in the shows, being in the exhibitions, is very important. And I always try to point it also in my works, in different little bit, but this scale, this physical things. And in Friedman Gallery is also it's very specific hall. Exhibition hall, it's very long.
Long and narrow.
And I was thinking about it, I don't know, a few months. And as I told to Ilya Friedman, I told him, you have very time-based space because you can follow through and read the story. And I also will maybe make the same principle. I put a little bit more realistic in the beginning and go to more abstract on the back. But I will try not to do it not I will think it's next week.
It's very exciting. You finished the work now, right? You're ready to go.
I finished already.
Great. Well, I think that sort of sums up what we wanted to talk about, unless somebody else has a question or something they'd like to add.
Sure. I'm not sure if give folks a chance to ask. So one comment and question. I was just hoping, I don't know if Barbara had a chance to chat with you about actually the security guards.
Yes, I meant to ask about that. Yeah.
Your work, right? Which is, I'm hoping you have the opportunity to maybe have a conversation with one or two of them.
Yeah.
So it's basically the whole team of this small security company that's based here that are big Afghani soldiers, right? And with the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, and that American soldiers who had been working with these Afghani soldiers have been trying to bring them here, find them an opportunity for work and set up a new life. So it's been just really intriguing of their, some small conversations I've had with them of their impressions. And so I'm just hoping you have the opportunity to chat with them. And I think you'd find their take on basically guarding your work an interesting perspective. And then what I was just going to ask was the second painting here, on the way they're lined up, I haven't been able to shake this image. This is really one has really stuck with me, and it's kind of curious, just the cross hatching, particularly in this, and then that sort of ghostly figure. That's part of this. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but just kind of curious about.
Yes, thank you so much, because it's for me was like a little bit step away, or I was thinking, because I easily could just remove this, because it was group portrait, and I easily could just paint one. But then, by intuition, I decided to include. I understood that it will be perceived as a host or person who is not exist.
Right.
I didn't want this, but I thought, okay, if it will be.
That looks like a ghost.
Yeah,
or a skeleton.
Yeah. So, okay, it will be my responsibility, but. I'm working also in other works based on the idea of the information, because I am dividing in my practice. It naturally happens that there is a definition of the physical body of the work, which I very often set in the middle of the space, not hang on the wall, build installation, building objects out of painting, and another aspect is of course image itself. And when I went very far to make objects, I thought, do I need images? What's the role of the images in my paintings? And it was a big problem. Then I started to develop idea of getting images, and I thought, okay, images are telling story, and I will think about the information. It's information on the surface. And it was also related to the war, because war needs information about the war, but artists are so fragile and so weak to just inform. There are a lot of different sources, like journalists, military journalists, who do it much better than artists, just like information. And also the cyber things, and also my students also, once, one of the youngest, he commented, we discussed mediums, and he said, sculpture has more data. How? More data, because he's
because it's three-dimensional.
Three-dimensional, more data, more definition, more pixels, because you can go closer. Because he's from math background, and I was like, oh, it's just another view of the same things. So I thought that this unfinished, because I'm working, like I never use pencil or some drawings, never use Beamer to just redraw. I'm just painting. It doesn't matter what size of the painting, and just start to paint from some sketch, and it's a way how I'm starting the work. These lines, it's my kitchen. But also I realized once that this drawing, it's like lack of the information about the figure. And in my previous works, for example, I was depicting soldiers from the window of my studio, but put in the middle of the painting myself, but drawing in this way only lines with empty center. And it was like blind spot in the middle of the composition, which really obscuring also the information about the war. And for me it was important because I'm as fact that I'm painting soldiers. I represent this fact because they're behind me, but I don't say anything about them and about my experience because it's impossible to share experience in the war. So it was like about the representation, international representation, and problem of this representation. And this I'm keeping it, and also I like this is the same tone but different intensity of paints. So I decided to keep, because it's like translation of digital language onto painting language. So I decided to use this idea of information onto painting strokes. That's it. But I totally agree with you, and I understood that it will be like, of course, and also with veterans. For me, it's very, very strong and important. And I think about it regarding Ukraine. Also, of course, my husband in the war, but also I'm thinking about I will maybe not teach anymore for some years, but I would like to work with veterans and return to Ukraine. And of course, never say about your plans, but I think it's most potential thing. And they will, of course, more fragile group. It's not professional militaries, it's our neighbors.
Right, yeah.
Guys from, it's every third person or every fifth person in Ukraine will get this, trauma somehow. So I think, and I wanted to use this opportunity to be in here because I know that there are a lot of different initiatives working with veterans in USA, especially between artists. I even know some. To maybe make some artworks, collaborations with them. I don't know. Of course, art as therapy, but of course with self-reflection as well, as I do always. Right. So it's next step, I think. But I hope everything will be okay. Then we could do this.
We all hope that. Yeah. Right.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here today and for this amazing festival where you brought together such vibrancy and a sense of urgency about understanding Ukraine in many more dimensions. It was actually kind of a couple questions. One, if you can talk some more about time in the sense of urgency, because on the one hand, there's the war that had been going on since 2014, but then became an existential threat a year ago, sort of the sense of time and urgency. But also, I think you talked today, and we talked definitely last night, about the fragility of institutions. At the same time, one of the things that's really striking about what the Russian invaders have encountered has been people who have been trying to stand up for, basic civil society. I mean, trying to take care of one another in the occupied territories, for example. That wasn't supposed to be real, right? And yet it's happening. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that in the connection to the arts and how that nurtures or sustains a sense of identity and trajectory as a society.
Thank you so much. I will a little bit combine both your questions and start with institutions and this 9 years already of the invasion. Because I really, in the existential sense of time, I really a little bit lost sense of time. Of course, especially after full-scale invasion, like everyone jokes that we live still in 24th of February 2022. So it's like, I don't know, it's very weird. But also a lot of things happened since 2014. But I would like to cover last maybe 4 years, because it was very interesting. It was unacceptable big blooming of the art institutional, life in Ukraine, thanks to our state foundation, one of the state foundation founded by after 2014, Ukrainian Culture Foundation. It's a presidential foundation that gives a lot of grants. It has quite a big, bank budget, and it helped to develop small independent initiatives and even be captured by Russia on the east. A lot of things happened even in Bakhmut. We developed, alternative art course for school in Mariupol, for example, a few years ago. But it was not state, but it was American foundation. But it was also different initiatives were everywhere, and it was decentralization because Kyiv was also main place for art institutions. It was in Lviv, in Ivano-Frankivsk, in Dnipro on the south appeared a lot of influence of spaces. It's weird to speak about it now because now everything collapsed. So, but I would like publicly to point at it because it's important that we are really developed. It was not like Russian propaganda says that it's not country, it wasn't country, it wasn't society. It was successfully developed and went to really I don't know, European, well-developed European country, and also with money. We had war, but the economical development was rising, really. In Kiev, it was very visible because a lot of people from eastern Ukraine moved to Kiev, and it was very dynamic. We were eastern capital of techno. It was true. A lot of jokes about the Kiev is the new Berlin because of pandemic. We didn't have strict regulation about pandemic.
We just ignored.
Yeah, we ignore. Yeah, we have, but we ignore. And a lot of people moved. Even musicians from Germany moved to Kiev because in Berlin they can't survive as a professionals. And a lot of things happened. A next point that is institutional landscape. From one hand, it's very fragile. Those institutions that I mentioned, it was almost alternative, not state. Some of them were like city, like in Lviv, municipal institutions, but it's a really big problem based on the absence of museum for contemporary art, absence of normal education, absence of a state center for contemporary art that should make a research and support experiments. We have one, but it's so corrupted and it doesn't function in proper way. It's a really fragile point, and we should also work on it strongly. In this also case, I wanted even before to mention Olga and her colleague Ksenia Malych initiative, institutional initiative in Closer. Closer is a nightclub, which was like about 7 years ago the biggest one in Kiev. And they were positioned themselves as an art center because they also have exhibition space. And Olga and Ksenia were run it, and it was best exhibition space, exhibition institute, visual art institution in that time. It was very independent. They have like zero budget, but they earn small budget for production exhibitions through opening reception and through bar. So they earned like maybe $200 or $300 overnight of the opening, and it covered the budget. And they have a brilliant tech team. They could do anything out of zero, and they had, despite this, they had. Over 5 years, they didn't have any bad show, really. They covered different kind of mediums, problematic. They covered historical show, first show of someone. So it was great. It just finished during pandemic because the club, it's a public space. They can't survive. They should cut their spaces, and they cut it just gallery because the rent cost a lot. But it was like great things, and it's about this losing of fear. They didn't afraid. They wasn't afraid. They just start to do it, like in idealistic way, and it's very much about it. And this fragility. Thank you for this question. I think these artists are quite protected by Western institutions during the war, as many of us. Even those who just went for the first time abroad, for example, I'm very happy really for them because they really will change a lot. But institutions are not. And on the beginning of the war, I wanted to make this relation between artists and institutions in Ukraine more visible. And I worked with Ivano-Frankivsk small institution, and we did a residency there and then show. And then the show was on a tour over Europe. And it was a lot of new connections. So it's a big complex of problems. And I also think that I told that what we were talking about, this folk culture, I think it's a responsibility of our Ministry of Culture at all. That Ministry of Culture never promote contemporary culture. Never. If they have chance to take part in Venice Biennale, they did it in so weird way that artists almost get dead after it because it was very difficult. And everything what going on, it's based on a personal initiative of the private people as an artist and curators. It's very specific. It's even very specific for Eastern Europe, because in Poland, in a neighbor country, they were developed institutional network over all country, or each small city, in completely different way. So we will do it in the future.
Well, what you just were talking about made me think about one thing that I'd like you to address, and that is that many of the Ukrainians in this country came a long time ago, and their perception of Ukrainian culture also is very old-fashioned. And you have an exhibit that's coming up in the Ukrainian Museum in New York, which is full of traditional objects. So how are you going to be approaching that? Can you share that with us?
Oh, thank you for the question. It's very interesting because I was invited for another show in end of the April, because Ukrainian Museum in New York was founded many years ago, and in the middle of 2000 they built a separate building on 6th Street in like Ukrainian village. And in New York context, it's very rich. In Kiev context, it looks like a business center. It was that style, you know. It's like office center of 2000s. With very, very clean, sterile, I would say. Not clear white cube, and it runs by donators, Ukrainian donators. It's a great, because it's a huge deal, and they have a very interesting collection. They have very prominent collection of folk craft, like outfits, carpets, and so on, and ceramics. They have some examples of Ukrainian avant-garde. Interesting one. Some examples even of propaganda posters of First World War, and they are now on the stage of rethink of its mission, because they got a new director who was director of Dallas Art Center. He has Ukrainian roots, but he's like international curator and director, and he has a lot of very, very, I think. He's more as an artist than in just a manager, because he invented very interesting ways of interpretation of the heritage and how they would do. And since I start to work with them, I start to think about my identity, because I'm not immigrant, you know. Officially, I am not on how to say, support. So I have artistic visa. I'm very professional here. I'm traveler, and I even was not immigrant in Europe when I just came. I was there for 2 months. You know, in Europe, they opened their doors in every country for Ukrainians, and we could stay, but we should register, make this how to say in English. Protection, yeah. In the USA, there is a program of protection, but because for me it's very unclear still who I am, because I was living for all my life in one place. But in this case with museum, it's very interesting, because it will be facing of two kind of Ukrainian identities. I am a true Ukrainian, but I will come with this interpretation of the Soviet heritage to people who are really try to ignore this fact of this existence of Soviet heritage. They can't, because it's even very problematic in Ukraine to work with 50s, with Soviet time. Right now, it became more and more wider used by, but even 8 years ago, only me was working with this. Then I was discussed hardly with my closest colleague Nikita Kadan, because we have state policy of decommunization. It means to destroy everything. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's catastrophe, because it just destroy. Because society is very damaged by neighbors, you know, and we want to react somehow. But my way of interpretation of Soviet works for Nikita was like following this idea of decommunization. He thought that I am following this movement, this policy, this propaganda. So it was like not conflict, but discussion between two approaches to this issue. even inside Ukraine, so it's a very, very controversial thing. But outside here, it's even harder, and I'm so curious because I will produce almost new works, and I will also a little bit reference on the folk collection, on the abstraction, because I think abstraction is the key between me and America. And these elder generations, they were grown in the middle of 20th century, which was only not only but abstraction, and through visual and through interpretation of the building. I'm always in Ukraine was working with a building, with the architecture, and because of the institutional positions, sometimes I understood institutions as an architecture, not like institutions, because they didn't have clear strategy, for example. So I was interacting with them as in buildings. It was also an institutional critique, and here I will mix everything. And also I'm happy because on the first floor, main show at the time will open at Janet Sobol. It's a Ukrainian immigrant, very, very early of 20th century. She was from Donetsk. I think she was run from Ukraine because she was Jew, and Jew family. It was, of course, this Kazakian pressure, and she's got to USA, and she started to work in very adult age. She had adult kids already, and she didn't have professional education, but she one of few who really got into the circle of New York school. And there is a fact that Pollock was impressed by her dripping. She was the first who made the dripping. And Pollock with Peggy Guggenheim just saw it on the show in New York, and then Pollock started to do it. And now there is a lot
Pollock followed her.
Yes, but it didn't prove that it's very... Now there is a lot of efforts between researchers to return to her this, medal. But the fact was that she didn't have an education, and a lot of things, also maybe gender thing. Maybe that she was very adult and she started to a lot of facts. But in this show, Peter Doroshenko will exhibit, the director will exhibit her pre-drippings, pre-abstraction. And in the period of World War II, World War II, stylization. And it's almost like me, because I'm always on one step before abstraction. I will never go. I went to abstraction, but for me, this balancing, it's very meaningful. And so for me, this context, when I've heard the first time that I will be with her, I thought, oh, it's like legitimation for me, or legalization. It's the best context I could even expect. And I think maybe I will even interpret one of her works to make it, this legalization official. I'm joking. I will try, and I'm still working. Of course, it's a big turbulence here, and I'm working everywhere. I found that it's good to work in airplanes. I have notebook, I have internet. It's very, yeah.
Well, I think that our time is up, right? So.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming, and
thank you so much.
And thank you, San Jose Jazz and MI Jazz, for doing something really significant here.
Yeah, I would also like to thank the San Jose Jazz and to Barbara to trust in me and to hear me and to be in dialogue. I got really new experience. It's not just like, my experience finished only in a studio and then I just send it somewhere. I receive a new experience as an artist, and thank you so much. And thank you for feedback. I received yesterday and day before strongest feedback, and thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just remembered that there's a wonderful arts institution His family came over probably in the